In a quiet neighborhood in Maplewood, Ohio, Carol Watson lived with her husband and son. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, gently illuminating the faces of the family sitting at the kitchen table. "Jason, have you finished your homework?" Carol asked her son while plating pancakes for breakfast. There was always warmth in her voice, and patience cultivated from her years working at the library shone through. 17-year-old Jason rubbed his sleepy eyes, but still managed a smile. "Mostly. The math yesterday was difficult, but I managed to finish it somehow." Carol gently stroked her son's head. She had been working as a curator at the local Willow Creek Library for 10 years. Her job was to open doors to the world of books, and her family understood this best. "Well done," Michael said, looking up from his newspaper. He worked as a programmer at an IT company and was known for his logical thinking and problem-solving abilities. "It's just like programming. You solve one problem at a time." Their household appeared to be an ordinary suburban family, but they faced a complicated situation in their relationship with Carol's parents, Robert and Ellen. They were prominent figures in Maplewood and held influence in the local social circles. As Carol was preparing breakfast, the phone rang. The screen displayed the name Brenda. It was Carol's sister. She answered with a sigh. "Carol, April won first place in the math contest again." Her sister's excited voice echoed from the other end. "Mom and Dad are so pleased. They said they're coming for dinner tonight." Carol smiled, but felt a small knot form inside. "That's great, congratulations. Please give my regards to April." 15-year-old April was Brenda's daughter, referred to as the family genius. She won prizes in math contests, always placed in the top ranks at science fairs, and received tremendous support from her grandparents. In contrast, Jason only maintained average grades in school and was implicitly considered a failure by Carol's parents. After ending the call, Carol gazed out the window. The neighboring houses stood quietly in the morning light. She remembered her own childhood. Robert and Ellen had always favored Brenda. They applauded her successes and consoled her failures. Meanwhile, Carol's achievements were taken for granted, and her failures harshly criticized. "Was that your mother?" Michael asked. He had already guessed the answer from his wife's expression. It was Brenda. "Apparently April won first place in something again," Carol said, trying to appear calm. Michael took his wife's hand. "Jason's worth isn't determined by his grades. He's a wonderful child." Jason had been diagnosed with a learning disability. Dyslexia made it difficult for him to read text, and it took him longer than usual to solve math problems. However, he never gave up. With Michael and Carol's support, he learned at his own pace and gradually made progress. "I know," Carol said. "We're proud of his perseverance. Surface-level grades don't matter." In reality, Jason had a wonderful character. He was considerate of his friends and always extended a helping hand to those in need. He volunteered at the local animal shelter and sometimes taught sports to younger children. Carol and Michael treasured their son's kindness above all else. On the other hand, contrary to her outward appearance, Carol had heard rumors that April was causing problems at school. There was talk about her bullying other students and cheating on tests. Of course, neither Brenda nor their parents would believe such stories. In their eyes, April was the perfect granddaughter and niece. That evening, while Jason was working on his homework, Carol and Michael were relaxing in the living room. "I need to talk to my parents about Jason's college fund," Carol said. "I'm worried about whether they're actually managing it as promised." They had been saving money for Jason's education since he was born so he could attend college. Initially, Carol's parents had offered to manage the fund, claiming they knew better investment methods. Carol and Michael, young at the time, had accepted the offer. Michael smiled mysteriously. "Don't worry." "What do you mean?" Carol tilted her head. "Trust me," Michael said. "Everything will be fine." Carol sensed that Michael was keeping some secret, but she trusted him and didn't press further. The two sat close together on the sofa, gazing at the starry sky outside the window. Tomorrow was Jason's 17th birthday. A dinner party with the whole family was planned. Carol hoped tomorrow would end as just a pleasant day. Happy birthday, Jason. The private room at Bella Notte, Maplewood's most reputable Italian restaurant, was filled with warm light. A cake with "Happy 17th Birthday, Jason" written on it was placed in the center of the table, with family gathered around. Jason smiled shyly, surrounded by his parents, grandparents, his Aunt Brenda, and his cousin April. He was dressed in a navy blue jacket and white shirt, an outfit his mother had selected for this special day. "Thank you, everyone," he said quietly. He seemed a bit more nervous than usual, but there was definite joy in his eyes. Carol stood beside her son and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's a special day, Jason. I'm so happy we can celebrate your 17th birthday with the whole family." The atmosphere of the upscale restaurant was more formal than usual, with soft light from chandeliers cascading from the ceiling and elegant art adorning the walls. It wasn't the most luxurious restaurant, but it was a special place for Maplewood residents. Michael raised his champagne glass. "Let's toast. Jason, you are our pride. We wish your future to be wonderful." As everyone clinked glasses, only Robert's expression remained hard. He participated in the toast formally, but his eyes were looking elsewhere, not at his grandson. Ellen was similar, hiding something behind a forced smile. "So, Jason," Brenda asked as the meal began. "Have you thought about college? April has already made a list of schools. Harvard and Yale are her top choices." April nodded proudly and smiled toward her aunt and grandparents. She shook her perfectly styled blonde hair at her shoulders and gave Jason a condescending look. Well, Jason hesitated a bit. "I'm thinking about Ohio State University or Belmont University. I want to study music and literature." "Music?" Robert suddenly raised his voice. "Do you think you can make a living with that?" "Dad," Carol said quietly. "Today is Jason's birthday. Please respect his dreams." Ellen gave a cold smile. "Dreams are dreams. Reality is much harsher, Carol. We're just concerned." A moment of silence fell over the table. The tension eased slightly as the waiter brought the main dishes. Exquisite pasta and steaks were served, and the conversation shifted to topics about the food. However, before dessert was served, Robert suddenly stood up. He cleared his throat and drew everyone's attention. "We have a special announcement tonight." Carol felt uneasy and looked at her husband. Michael maintained a calm expression, placing his right hand over his wife's. "We've been thinking about our grandchildren's futures," Robert continued. His voice carried authority, like announcing an important deal in a conference room. "We believe their education is the most important investment." Ellen also stood up and joined her husband. Her face wore a satisfied expression. "That's right. We believe we should make the best decisions for the family's future." Carol felt her stomach tighten. She instinctively feared the sudden change in atmosphere. Regarding Jason's college fund, Robert said gravely, "After careful consideration, we've decided to give those funds to April." The air in the room froze. The color drained from Jason's face, and Carol gasped. "What are you saying?" Carol stood up, her voice trembling. "That fund is for Jason. How could you take what we've been saving all these years and—" Ellen smiled maliciously and said, "Face reality. If your son fails, it would just be wasted. April can make better use of those funds." Brenda shrugged. There was a triumphant light in her eyes. "Of course, my child deserves it more. She has a brilliant future ahead." Jason sat in his chair with a hurt expression. His birthday had suddenly turned into an occasion where his worth was denied. Tears welled in his eyes. Carol trembled with anger. "What right do you have? That fund is what we—" At that moment, Michael, who had been quietly eating, suddenly began to chuckle. At first, it was a small laugh, but it gradually grew louder. Everyone's eyes turned to him. "How funny," Michael said calmly. There was strange confidence in his voice. "It's already been paid for." "What?" Robert and Ellen exclaimed simultaneously. What do you mean? Brenda asked, looking confused. Michael wiped his mouth with a napkin and slowly stood up. He was usually a quiet man, but now he was the calmest person in the room. It's simple, he said. Jason's college fund is already in a safe place. There's nothing left in the account that you can access. That's a lie. Robert shouted. His face turned red with anger. We manage it. That account is empty, Michael said quietly. Has been for years. Ellen collapsed into her chair. That can't be, we. The elegant private room of the restaurant was suddenly filled with chaos. A waiter peeked in worriedly from the entrance but quickly retreated. Jason stared at his father with a surprised expression. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he found hope in his father's words. Carol also stared at her husband. She had sensed he was keeping a secret, but she hadn't anticipated this development. Michael, she said in a small voice. Michael smiled gently at his wife. I'll explain later. But for now, let's celebrate our son's birthday. He picked up his glass again and said, let's make a real toast. To Jason's future. Silence fell over the room. Robert and Ellen were speechless with anger and shock, while Brenda and April were bewildered. But gradually, expressions of relief returned to Carol and Jason's faces. That night, under the starry sky of Maplewood, the power dynamic within a family shifted significantly. Jason's 17th birthday became a night that no one would forget. 3 days later, a heavy atmosphere hung in the living room of Carol's house. Outside the window, early summer sunlight made the tree leaves glisten, but inside, dark clouds seemed to be gathering. They still haven't given up, Carol said, sitting deeply on the sofa and staring at the mobile phone in her hand. They've called 5 times just this morning. Michael sat next to his wife with a coffee cup in hand. As expected. They can't accept that their plan has collapsed. Carol's parents had been fiercely protesting since the restaurant incident. They called Michael's statement a malicious lie, and insisted they still had management rights over the fund. They're saying they won't hesitate to take legal action, Carol sighed. Dad says he's consulted a lawyer. Michael smiled calmly. His expression showed calculated confidence. It's going to be fine. There's nothing they can do. Jason appeared from the kitchen. He was holding a glass of water and seemed to have been listening to his parents' conversation. I'm sorry for causing all this trouble, he said apologetically. Carol stood up and hugged her son. No, Jason. This isn't your fault. It's your grandparents and Brenda who are wrong. But if I were smart like April. Listen, Jason, Michael looked into his son's eyes with a serious expression. A person's worth isn't determined by their grades alone. You have a wonderful character. That's what truly matters. Jason smiled weakly, but anxiety remained in his eyes. He hadn't been able to concentrate at school these past few days and hadn't been sleeping well. I knew grandparents didn't like me, but I never thought it would go this far, he said quietly. Carol's heart ached. It was painful just to think about how much her parents had hurt her son. I didn't know either, she answered honestly. That they would do something like this. I can't forgive them. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. When Carol opened the door, her parents and Brenda were standing there. Their expressions were stern, especially Robert's face, which was distorted with anger. We've come to talk, Ellen said coldly. Carol invited them in, but her movements showed obvious tension. In the living room, Michael stood up to greet them. Jason had retreated to his room. Let's hear your explanation, Michael, Robert said in an intimidating voice. He was carrying a briefcase. If what you say is true, I want to see the evidence. Michael nodded calmly. Of course, Robert. But first, let me ask you. Why did you suddenly decide to give Jason's education fund to April? That should be obvious, Ellen interjected. Funds should be directed where the maximum return is expected. April has talent. Whereas Jason is She trailed off. You mean ordinary? Carol's voice trembled. Is that how you evaluate your own grandson? Brenda frowned with displeasure. Face reality, Carol. April has already won multiple awards. What has Jason accomplished? He's growing as a person, Michael said quietly. I don't expect you to understand how valuable that is. Robert made no effort to hide his irritation and opened his briefcase. I didn't come here for a philosophical debate. Look at this. He took out legal documents and spread them on the table. According to this deed, the Educational Trust Fund is in our name. That means we have the right to decide how those funds are used. Carol and Michael looked at the documents, but their expressions showed calmness rather than fear. That's correct, Michael agreed. But there's one problem. What? Robert said triumphantly. That account is empty, Michael smiled. I transferred the funds to a different trust 3 years ago. What? Robert raised his voice. That's impossible. Without our approval. No, it was possible, Michael said calmly. He took out his smartphone and opened an app. Take a look. This is Jason's current education trust fund. It's separate from the account you thought you were managing. The screen displayed a 6-figure number. Brenda gasped, and Ellen's face changed color. This is illegal. Robert trembled with anger. Did you deceive us? Michael shook his head. I didn't deceive anyone. I just made a wise decision. I predicted that someday you might put Jason's future at risk. I'm a counselor, Carol said quietly. I can see people's true nature. I always sensed that my parents constantly favored you, Brenda, and looked down on Jason. Brenda couldn't hide her distress. But April needs the funds. She deserves to go to a top university. You should have saved for your own daughter, Carol said coldly. Her voice contained years of anger and sadness. Robert grabbed the legal documents and shook them violently. Don't think this is over. We'll see you in court. Please do, Michael said calmly. He opened another file on his smartphone and showed it to them. This is a letter from my lawyer. According to him, you have no legal grounds. The transfer of funds was completely legal. Silence fell over the room. The blood drained from Robert and Ellen's faces, and Brenda collapsed into a chair. Why would you do something like this? Ellen said in a trembling voice. To protect our family, Michael said. When you tried to threaten Jason's future, I had already taken measures to protect him. Robert was furious but had to recognize his legal defeat. Don't think this is over, he said in a low voice. As family, we have rights. Family? Carol laughed. It was a cold, sad laugh. Have you ever treated Jason as family? Have you ever truly loved him? Brenda stood up. Tears welled in her eyes. Carol, you shouldn't say things like that. We are. Enough, Carol said. We're done for today. Please leave. As the three left the house with dissatisfaction, Jason quietly came down from the second floor. He had heard most of the family conversation. Are you okay? He asked his parents. Carol and Michael approached their son, and the three embraced. We're fine, Carol said. Your future is protected. No one can take it away. Why didn't you tell me? Jason asked his father. About the fund. Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I didn't want to worry you. And, sometimes secrets are necessary. That night, Carol's family felt more strongly connected than ever. The outside world was still harsh, and many obstacles still lay ahead of them, but they had trust and love for each other. That was a treasure more valuable than any education fund. A refreshing May breeze swept across the vast lawn of Maplewood High School. On graduation day, hundreds of chairs were neatly arranged in the schoolyard, and red and gold decorations adorned the building. Carol gripped her husband's hand tightly as she watched the graduates enter. Her heart was filled with pride. Jason's high school graduation. She had been looking forward to this day for a long time. Nervous? Michael asked his wife. Carol smiled. A little. But happy. They had intentionally not invited her parents or Brenda's family. Since that night, relationships had remained unrepaired. Occasionally, there were brief conversations over the phone, but there were no more family gatherings like before. It's starting, Carol leaned forward. The graduates, dressed in gowns and caps, entered to the traditional march. Carol immediately spotted Jason. He was in the middle of the line, walking and chatting with friends. He looked confident, different from the timid boy he once was. He's grown up, tears welled in Carol's eyes. Following the principal's speech, the awards for academic excellence began. Carol and Michael didn't expect their son's name to be called. Jason was a student with average grades in school. However, they were surprised when the principal spoke these words. And now, for a special award. This award is given to a student who has demonstrated not just academic achievement, but creativity, perseverance, and excellent character. This year's Maplewood High School Spirit of Resilience Award goes to Jason Watson. Applause erupted from the audience. Carol and Michael looked at each other in amazement. Did you know? Carol asked her husband. Michael shook his head. Not at all. He kept it a secret. As Jason went up to the stage, the principal placed a hand on his shoulder and continued into the microphone. While facing learning disabilities, Jason has blossomed with his unique talents. His short story won first place in the state contest, and his musical compositions have been highly praised in the Young Composers program. Furthermore, his volunteer work at the animal shelter and support for children with dyslexia deserve commendation. Carol put her hand to her mouth, unable to hold back tears. She hadn't known that Jason had been quietly nurturing his talents. He had been hiding his achievements even from his family, fearing criticism. Jason received the trophy and gave a short speech. I am truly honored to receive this award. I thank my parents for supporting me. They never doubted my worth and allowed me to grow at my own pace. I also thank Ms. Jones for appreciating my work. I want to tell everyone that each person has different talents. It may take time to find them, but never give up. The venue was filled with warm applause. Carol and Michael stood up and waved to their son. Jason found them and returned a bright smile. After the ceremony, Jason rushed to his parents. He proudly held up his trophy. Surprised, he laughed. Carol hugged her son. Completely. Why didn't you tell us? I wanted it to be a surprise, Jason said. And he continued, a bit embarrassed, I thought I might fail. Michael gripped his son's shoulder. You're our pride, Jason. By the way, Jason said with a somewhat mysterious expression. About college, I actually have good news. He took an envelope from his bag. It had the logo of a famous music university printed on it. I received a scholarship from Berklee College of Music. A full ride. Carol and Michael exclaimed with joy at their son's success. They didn't know it, but Jason had secretly applied and impressed the judges with his musical compositions. His unique perspective was valued and recognized as a special talent. That's not all, Jason continued. I also received a partial scholarship for literature from another university. So, I have options. Meanwhile, at Carol's parents' house, a different kind of conversation was taking place. I'm worried about April, Brenda said, sitting in her parents' living room with a tired expression. I got a call from her teacher. Apparently, she was caught cheating on the final exam. Robert and Ellen looked shocked. That can't be, Ellen denied. She's an excellent child. The teacher has evidence, Brenda's shoulders drooped. This is the third time. She might be expelled. What? Robert raised his voice. Why didn't you say anything before? Brenda lowered her eyes. I didn't want to admit it. April was the family's pride. Her voice trailed off. Recently, she had begun to learn that many of her daughter's talents were false. Behind her excellent grades were dishonesty, and some of the awards were not based on ability but manipulation. Ellen sat deep in the sofa. What about college? I don't know, Brenda answered honestly. We don't have the funds either. She trailed off. Their plans had completely collapsed. That night, Carol's family was celebrating at a local high-end restaurant. Michael raised a champagne glass. Jason, let's toast to your courage and perseverance. And to a wonderful future. The three clinked glasses with smiles. Are you ready? Carol asked her husband sitting under the Christmas tree in the living room. Outside the window, soft snow was falling quietly. 3 years had passed. Jason was in his second year at Berklee College of Music and had already begun to make a name for himself in small composition contests. His internship was also successful, and he had a job promised after graduation. Yes, all set, Michael smiled. Some white was beginning to mix into his hair, but his eyes still shone with kindness. Our son will be home soon. Jason was scheduled to return home from Boston for winter break. He was enjoying college life and reported new discoveries and successes each time he called his parents. Carol stood by the window, contemplating the changes over these 3 years as she gazed at the snow scene. The relationship with Brenda and April hadn't completely severed, but it had become distant. April couldn't go to university after all and was working part-time at a local fast food restaurant while studying at a community college. Meanwhile, Carol's parents remained stubborn and refused to acknowledge their grandson's success. They were getting older and facing health issues, but they wouldn't abandon their pride. The doorbell rang, and Carol came back to herself. Could that be Jason? She looked at the clock. It's too early. When she opened the door, an unexpected person stood there. It was her sister Brenda. She looked thinner than before, and her face showed signs of fatigue. May I come in? Brenda's voice was small, and her former arrogance was gone. Carol hesitated for a moment but invited her sister in. Michael also looked at Brenda with a surprised expression. Where's April? Carol asked. At work, Brenda said. She's changed too. Become more realistic. Sitting on the living room sofa, Brenda exhaled deeply. I came to apologize, Carol. Carol was surprised by her sister's words. Brenda was never the type to apologize. I was wrong back then, Brenda continued. I became my parents' puppet and used my own daughter. It was unfair to both April and Jason. Why now? Carol asked cautiously. I saw reality, tears glistened in Brenda's eyes. Watching April struggle, I realized my own mistakes. I hadn't truly supported her in a meaningful way. Silence fell over the room. Outside, snow continued to accumulate quietly. And our parents? Michael asked. Brenda shook her head. They haven't changed. They still think they're right. But I won't be their yes, woman anymore. Carol was torn by complex emotions. Anger, sadness, and compassion for her sister intermingled. It will take time, Carol said quietly. I know, Brenda nodded. I won't rush. I hope we can start over as sisters. Michael placed a hand on Carol's shoulder and quietly said, people can change. At that moment, the front door opened, and Jason came in carrying his luggage. I'm home. His bright voice echoed throughout the house. He entered the living room and looked surprised to see Brenda. Aunt? Brenda stood up awkwardly. Jason, it's been a while. How's college life? Jason hesitated for a moment but answered, it's great. Questions lingered in his eyes, but he seemed to sense from the atmosphere that something had changed. That night, the four spent a quiet Christmas Eve together. The wounds of the past wouldn't heal immediately, but there was the possibility of a new beginning. The city lights covered in snow were visible from the window, and a quiet peace enveloped the house. As Carol gazed at Jason's grown figure, she felt anew what true family bonds meant. They are born not just from blood ties, but from hearts that believe in and support each other.